Welcome to this episode of Perspectives. I am your host and your guide, Remy Pearson. Today, we are really thrilled. You might be able to see their image there. If you're watching this, you'll be able to see the image there of who our guest is. It's Dr. Shefali. And Dr. Shefali, you probably already know this, is the author of The Conscious Parent. Hopefully you can see that if you're looking on the screen. All of this will be in the show notes. And Dr. Shefali very kindly sat down for a conversation with me, and it was fantastic. We talk about what conscious parenting is, and we talk about the hierarchical narrative that tends to exist in most homes these days, which is that very traditional top-down approach where it's about control and power and about doing as I say, not as I do. And that narrative has been around so long that maybe we don't question it as we need to. I can certainly say Shefali questions it loudly and clearly in this conversation and just paints a picture of a different narrative that's available to us if we choose to. If you're watching this podcast or you're a follower of mine, you probably are someone who's becoming conscious and is really open to that discussion about what it means to be conscious within ourselves and within our relationships. And I believe consciousness needs to extend to parenting as well. I meet so many parents who feel the discomfort, the pain of feeling that they haven't connected the way they had envisioned they would with their child. And then they say to me so often, it's too late now, or I've done the damage, or I've done the harm. And what Shefali is sharing is there is a pathway to ourselves if we're willing to own, not blame, but own our part in how this is unfolding before us, become aware of it, and then deal with whatever is creating these flare-ups in our relationships around us or creating this discontent or dis-ease or discomfort. If we're prepared to deal with it within us rather than thinking it's them that has to change, what can happen with enough practice, and it doesn't happen overnight, is our personal reactivity isn't as activated as often. And that means these interactions will be much what I call cleaner, and we'll be able to be present to this person and who they are rather than present to who we think they should be or who we'd prefer or what we're projecting, or present through our own discomfort. What I think Dr. Shefali does beautifully is give us an opportunity to take that journey with her. She's also going to be appearing around Australia and New Zealand. So a bunch of dates are going to be below this in the show notes if you're listening. And if you're watching us, we'll include all the dates as well, which will be marvelous. And also, if you enjoy what we do here at Perspectives, it would be fantastic if you could head over to your iPhone and go into the app that's all about podcasts. And if you could subscribe to Perspectives and maybe even leave a really a lovely review and a hello to me. I'd love to start reading out some reviews, but by you clicking subscribe and leaving a review, it really helps this podcast rate. We do so well. We have 500,000 to 1.5 million views per episode, but it's not showing up on where it's measured for podcasts that are really doing so well in Australasia. So if you love this message, firstly, know how grateful I am that you stick around, you listen, you tune in, and you watch. Look forward to your comments always. And if you wouldn't mind heading over and doing what really makes that difference, hitting the subscribe button, leaving a review, a comment to me, that'd be wonderful. And hopefully I'll be able to read it out soon. And in the meantime, here is my conversation with the beautiful, passionate, and very conscious parent, Dr. Shefali. It's such a pleasure to have you here. And I know there's going to be so many people tuning into this conversation. Dr. Shefali here herself from India. It's such an honor to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, I'm on my way to see you in Australia soon. So
yes.
I stopped in India before, and I'm so happy to be here with you.
You're coming to Australia. You're going to be in Perth. This podcast will drop on the Wednesday. You're going to be here in Perth. We get to meet each other this Sunday on the 24th. We'll put in the show notes, everybody who's watching this, where you're going to be showing. And I will at the end read the dates, because I know I know hundreds of people who follow you on Instagram, love your message, connect with it. I have coaches in our programs teaching based on what you teach. They literally
that's
coach
amazing.
based on your message.
I'm so happy to hear that. So I hope they come out and see me in Perth and all the other cities. Yes.
Yeah. So for those of us who have been literally under a rock and don't know, Dr. Shefali is the author of a number of books, and one of them is The Conscious Parent that I've been devouring. I am not a parent, but I coach parents. I work with parents, and the number one cry I would hear, put in many songs, but the number one cry here is, I feel I'm messing up. I don't know how. I don't know why, but I'm not able to make that connection that I wish I was making. That tends to be the narrative that I keep hearing. Is this resonating with what you find as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think we enter the parenting journey with a really high standard of expectation, a really big movie fantasy in our head. And that
Yes.
fantasy is that the child will be of our making, and the child will be moldable and adaptable and kind of like us because it's our child. And so when the child comes to be their own being with their own, destiny and their own way to manifest that destiny, we find that we have to adapt to that. But our expectation, that egoic rigidity that we have had in our subconscious but we're not aware of, fights that acceptance of the kid as they are. And this clash between our expectation and who the kid really is really messes us up. So the kid is fine and the connection is right there. But because we are blocked by our own egoic veils, that blocks us from seeing our child for who it is they are. And then we blame the child. Then we send the kid for therapy and we yell at the kid, but it's not the kid. It's our own veils. The kid is always connected. The kid is always present. It's us who are disconnected from within. And this is a really hard thing for parents to get. And this is what I'll be talking about when I come to teach, how to teach parents to get into their heart and drop that egoic persona that they don't even know they have.
Yeah, let's talk about what ego is. You cover it really well in the book, and I'm sure you'll cover it when we come and see you. But what does it mean to let ego get in the way? What are we speaking about there? Can you give me a snapshot? Because I know a parent's going to be listening and maybe feeling a little uptight about the message, hearing it's maybe them. What is the aspect of ourselves that it may be that's getting in the way?
The ego is a part of ourselves that we develop in childhood that protects us from pain. But because it's created out of fear and created to protect us from the pain of being invalidated or being seen as unworthy by our parents, that fear-based persona actually separates us from the rest of our relationships. It's a funny thing, this ego, and it's complex, but at its core, it's a false way that we have developed to live to protect us. So when we become parents, how the ego shows up is that we create a prescription list for how our kids should be so that we're protected from the pain of the imperfections of parenthood. So we create a list. Well, if I just put my kid in X number of classes, and if I just, send them to these tutors, then I'll be protected from the pain of the possibility that my kid is imperfect or ordinary, and I have to deal with that. And that brings up my imperfections. So I'll just create an expectation. I'll just create a prescription list and I won't examine it. That way, I'll just make my kid my little puppet, and that way I'll be fine. It's this really strange thing that we do in the world. We do it with all our relationships. And we live in ego, which is our own belief systems. Ego means we live in the conditioning of our childhood that hasn't been examined, that hasn't been awakened. And we place these expectations on all our relationships, and we don't even realize we are. And this creates separation. So then the kid, if the kid is not a compliant, good kid, and the kid dares to have their own way about them, then that kid fights with you. And in order to protect against that pain of that conflict, we become even more rigid. with our expectations. And we don't realize that this is actually causing deep disconnection. But the wonderful thing about the ego is that it causes so much disconnection and dysfunction in our relationships that eventually we have to say to ourselves, is it me? Or what about me is causing this? And we have a breakdown and we hit rock bottom. And the rock bottom is because the ego has hit rock bottom, meaning like, oh my God, I cannot get my way anymore. The ego is screaming, saying, I gotta stop, I'm dying. And when the ego dies because of its own chaos, then perhaps is an opportunity for an awakening. And that's what I teach, how to awaken from the debris of our ego.
So how would ego show up? So I have looked at your book. I've also done it by audio, and you speak of different ways it can show up. It could be ego of status, of conformity, but can you give an example? You're with your child, and how do we bring ourselves out of the trance and into awareness? Because I think the first step, as you do, is let's get aware of ourselves. How can we become aware that we're coming from this egoic place?
Right. So let's take two very common generic examples. One is your kid is a teenager and your kid screams, I hate you. Or, you're the worst mom in the world. So there the ego will show up because, you're feeling invalidated. You're feeling helpless. So the ego will protect you against that pain and yell back at the kid and throw the kid out of the house or ground the kid. And what the disconnect right there that the ego creates is this lack of compassion for your kid, lack of empathy, that they're saying, I hate you because they're feeling some type of way. But because you have this ego that comes up that wants to protect you, you yell at your kid. Or let's take another example. Your 5-year-old is not invited to the, kindergarten party of the popular kid, right? Of the birthday party of the most popular kid. And now your ego that wants to belong shows up, and your ego of conformity, that it wants to be a conforming parent and be the parent of a popular kid, shows up. And instead of empathizing with your kid or teaching your kid that this is normal, it's okay to not be invited, you get really angry. And then you want to protect against that pain of not being invited, of not belonging. And you call up the parent of the kid and you call up the teacher and you get all upset. And you don't see that it's your ego. Now, if you didn't have ego in both these cases, in the first case, you would see when your kid says, I hate you, as an alarm sign that your kid is really saying, I hate myself or I hate it. But because your ego is taking it personally, now you're attacking your kid. In the second case, you would teach your kid that, yeah, it's normal. I'm sorry, I cannot puppeteer the kid to like you, and everyone can't like you. And you would go through the pain with your kid, teaching them how to go through their pain rather than fixing it. But because your ego was activated, you will now go crazy and get upset and make a big deal out of it and engage in a battle cry because it's your ego, but you don't realize it's your ego, right? So then you're engaging and then you're creating all this panic in your kid. In the second case, when your kid doesn't get invited, sure, they'll cry. But after 2 days, your kid will get over it. But because you make such a big deal out of it, now they make such a big deal out of it. And now they're all these fragile, sensitive kids who can't handle not being invited to a birthday party because you can't handle not being invited to a birthday party. So this is how we create the drama in our lives and teach our kids to be these fragile creatures because we are fragile.
And we want to protect them from the fragility we've never learned to handle. The way I look at it is this, I think you write about it as well. It's not so much we want to protect them, we're almost trying to protect ourselves from the feelings we've never handled within ourselves. And yeah, I call it offloading. It's like we're offloading our discomfort onto our child.
Yes. Oh, it's called projection. We're projecting that they can't handle it because we can't handle it. And listen, when parents hear this, they shouldn't hear blame or judgment from me. I have made all these mistakes, and that's how I have awakened. I've only made mistakes, right? So they shouldn't hear some pedantic preacher sermonizing to them. I get it. I understand the parental mentality so well and the parental ego because I've been there. I have lived there. I live with these projections every day. The point of conscious parenting is not to be rid of these projections. The point of conscious parenting is to be awakened to the acceptance of them. When we accept that we are an ego, Now we're entering presence, and now we're entering consciousness. So parents always come up to me with, indignation and resentment toward my message, that they feel like I'm putting them down. And I say to them, I'm not putting you down. I'm raising you up. I'm saying, come on, let's look at the war wounds of your ego, what the wounds have been, and what the ego has created, with compassion. And when you do, you begin to liberate yourself. And when you liberate yourself, you liberate your children. So don't take this so personally, but parents, how we parents are. We are very defensive. I used to be defensive too. I used to be like, how can you tell me I'm wrong? And how can you tell me I'm not perfect? Till I realized that I'm only imperfect. And it's okay to not know how to do this thing called parenting. I still don't know. My daughter's almost 20 and I'm still clueless. I still say the wrong thing. I still disconnect with her because of my ego. So it's not about overcoming this ego. It's about befriending this ego and understanding your ego.
Do people really get defensive with you about this message? I've watched you for ages on Instagram. People really get defensive about you sharing there's a way of showing up in your own life that will empower you and your kids?
Well, not every parent, but many parents. Yeah, many parents.
Wow.
It's not popular at all. My message is extremely provocative.
Really?
Extremely provocative. It's not mainstream at all. It's extremely unconventional. I mean, I go on interviews and many times the host will say, let's not piss parents off, and let's be careful, because parents are fragile, first, because our entire identity is based on our children and how they fare. So if I tell a parent that your kid's anxiety may be related to your anxiety, the parent feels immediately castigated. And if they have issues of blame and shame from their childhood, then they feel like I'm putting them down. I can see that, I can see how they could get defensive, but I'm here to help parents. I'm here to help parents forge a greater connection with their kids. And if they come for one of my talks, I can guarantee you they will leave more inspired, with greater tools, but they have to get past their defensiveness. The first message of conscious parenting is that the way we parent our children is based on how we were parented. And if we're not willing to own at least just that little truth, then we won't get past it,
Of course. That, to me, I will say I'm going to speak on behalf of our viewers. I think they're going to be really open to this message. I really do. Good. I think Dr. Shefali, this is where they want to live, the seat of consciousness and understanding themselves more deeply so they can experience love more deeply. And this is such an important message. One of the things you talk about in The Conscious Parent that I loved was, I can't remember how you put it, but it was something like questioning the dominant narrative of hierarchical parenting, which I think hierarchical parenting and controlling parenting is anything but conscious parenting. But it's what I experienced from what I heard in your book. It's what many of the people you work with experience, this dominant narrative about the parent says so, and therefore it's enough. I said so. Can you talk about what happens if we're raised in that dominant, hierarchical, controlling form of parenting?
Yeah, well, that is the dominant narrative, as you said. It is what I call the traditional paradigm. Yeah. And conscious parenting is the new paradigm that is going to revolutionize the old way of being. But I'm teaching parents to do conscious parenting who have been raised in the dominant traditional narrative.
Yes.
So it is you're bang on to bring on this question, because it's extremely hard to change your paradigm when you've been raised in the other way. Now, if you were raised in the other way and you hate it, you may say, I'll never do it like my parents. But you can never not do something simply by declaring it. You can only not do something by truly awakening and healing from it. So just saying, I'm never going to hit my kid is one level of resistance, but it's not it's not going to go deep. You'll still be controlling. You'll still be ruled by that dominant narrative because you were raised that way. So the only way to really get out of the old way is to heal from it. Now, so we were mostly raised from the dominant behaviorist approach, reward and punishment approach. And children were not empowered to understand that they come with a destiny. Children were not empowered to be in their power, right? We were kind of emasculated from our power because we were raised in this traditional hierarchical way. And we were told to be assertive outside the house, never inside the house.
True.
And we were given these given these mixed
Yes.
messages, right? So the conscious parenting paradigm is busting that and teaching our children that they can be assertive, they can be assertive against us, and that's okay. But that takes a high degree of consciousness on the part of the parent to be able to handle the no. You know, my daughter's 20. I can tell you she only mostly says no to me. And now I have to handle that, right? As a parent, like, what do you mean no? And I can hear the old paradigm in my voice where which says things like, you know, I never said no to my parents. I never dared to talk back, you know, but I'm allowing my daughter to talk back to me. And I have to handle it, right? And it's really a lot to handle because the old narrative says my kid better be compliant. So it's very difficult to change it when we have been raised to be compliant. And conscious parenting says, no, we are not raising compliant children. We're not raising minions and slaves, but we were minions and slaves. So it's really hard then when our kid is all talking, we call it talking back, right? And if you really look at that phrase, talking back, of course the kid is going to talk back because they have a voice, right? Yes. But we don't want them to talk. We don't want them to talk back because that's how crazily we were raised. We were raised to not talk back. So we were basically suppressed and oppressed. And we want our children to be raised in the same way, really deep down. But conscious parenting is busting that and teaching us to raise powerful, opinionated, loud, empowered children. And at times that'll seem like disrespect to us. You know, every day I feel my kid is disrespecting me deep down, but then I question myself. No, she's not disrespecting you. She is going against the way you were raised, Shefali. And she has no agenda to disrespect you. You see, when we were growing up, our parents acted as if we had an agenda against them if we went against them. Like, how dare you go against me? So when our kids go against us, you know, that old voice says, oh my God, my kid is going against has an agenda against me. But our kids have no agenda against us. Our kids actually couldn't give a shit about us. They are not taking everything personally, and they don't mean everything personally. But because of the way we were raised, we take everything so personally. And that's what I'm going to help parents undo in their minds, that it's not personal. But we take everything personally. You know, if our kid gets a C grade, we are embarrassed. If our kid has wild, crazy hair and have mismatched socks, we take it personally because we have all this unresolved stuff inside us that we have not healed.
Because it's not allowed to reflect badly on us. Whatever happens, everything we do, so many people do, is about controlling the outside to tame the discomfort inside. And then this own person comes along who has their own views and their own ideas, and because they're a person, and they're never going to conform to everything else we've managed to control. So anyone watching this, if you're a little bit control freaky, kids are going to really press your buttons. They've got to, because you can control the housework and the neatness and the meals and your schedule. And then a child comes along and doesn't care about anything you want to control.
Yeah. And every one of us is control freaky, if we're honest. Yeah. Some of us control it through just outward aggression, but others of us control it through just, even the one who's not there, like say the absent parent, they're controlling their inner chaos too by just not being there. You know,
and people pleasers, they're controlling.
People pleasers are the biggest, big controllers. I'm a fixer, and So it's not about being ashamed to say I'm a total control freak. It is the nature of being a parent. And it's the subconscious nature of being a parent. And until we truly are brutally honest about that subconscious nature, we will keep controlling our children. So in my journey, I saw how controlling I was. I'm still controlling. The only difference now is I don't want to be controlling anymore. So every day I fight that, not in an angry way, but I try to heal that part of me that needs control. And I begin to have compassion for my inner child that is so desperate for control that it wants to control a 2-year-old. You know, when I saw that I wanted to control my 2-year-old, that's when I knew I was really effed up. I was like, oh my goodness, you can't handle a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old was like a demon to me, right?
Yeah.
I was like, I have to control this 2-year-old. And that's when I saw my own sickness, and I saw how unhealed I was. And I had compassion for myself, because I realized that my mom tried to control me. So it's
Yeah.
not my fault. It's the way this paradigm is set up. So
Mm.
if you're a parent out there and you want to do it differently and don't know how, then you have to come for one of my talks, because you're not supposed to know how to do it differently.
No.
I just want you to have the want to do it differently, and then I will help you do it differently, you know?
Yeah. I think there's two pieces I want to pick up you just said. One is your child doesn't have the parent thinks my child has an agenda that's against me. Well, let me just put it to parents. Don't you have an agenda? Aren't you trying to get your way right now? Aren't you trying to assert your will? Is that not an agenda? But then we say to this other person, and with an accusation, you've got an agenda, but don't you? How is it that they're not allowed an agenda, but you are? And that's
You
again
know how?
hierarchical.
It's even, and it's even more insidious than just being hierarchical. I'll tell you how we parents justify our agenda,
Yeah.
because our agenda is all about love, Remy.
Yes. Yeah, of
We
course.
only yell, we only yell at our kids because we love them.
Yeah.
We only force them to ballet because we love them. And we have decided that we are the most loving, amazing. We have this God complex, angel complex. We
Love it.
we we are amazing.
Yeah.
So how can you say to me as a
Mm.
parent that I am controlling my kids? So the other day I was sitting around this
Yes.
table, this dinner table, and one of the people were talking about how their younger kid is not a really good tennis player and is always scared to be aggressive, and was talking about it all in judgment, like, oh my God, we have to teach her to be more aggressive, and she's so scared to be aggressive, and as if that she was wrong and faulty. So I then said, what's wrong if she's just the way she is? And why are you putting your agenda of that she needs to be an aggressive tennis player onto her? Oh my goodness, the parent got so upset with me because she said,
Really?
how can you say it's my agenda? I'm not controlling her. She wants to be aggressive. She wants to win, but then she's so passive. So I said, yes, but that's okay. And we have to tell her her nature is not aggressive, and it's okay for her to not win. But you are feeding that because it's your agenda. And there was this big heated battle. And the parent said,
Really?
yes, yes. So the parent said, I'm just doing what the kid wants because I love my kid. I said, no, you're doing what you are pushing your agenda, and you don't even realize that you're pushing your agenda.
Yeah.
So it's really hard because we've decided that we are so noble, and everything that's coming out of us is paved in the best intention. And that's not true.
No. The second part that I love what you were talking about is we're raised a certain way, and then we say to ourselves, I'm not going to raise my kid that way. I'm going to be way better than that. I'm not going to be hierarchical or controlling. And we find ourselves doing the same thing. But the question I've got to put to anyone who's parenting is, how could it be otherwise when you've never seen otherwise, if you don't know otherwise? You get to the point of your child's defiance, and when you defied, you were controlled, coerced, penalized, muted, shamed, blamed, whatever happened. And now your child's doing the exact same thing. The defiance you did that was controlled and not allowed, you were not accepted in your defiance. How can it be different until we learn differently? This is all got to, we must learn these new narratives. That's why I think this message you've got is so important. Your whole message is about what do you do at that moment when the defiance triggers you? Do it differently. But to learn different, Dr. Shefali, that is big.
Oh, you're so articulate, and you're so right. Absolutely. You said it beautifully. That how can it be different till you've learned differently? That's why I said that the parent who says, I'm just not going to do it like my mom, is not going to succeed. They're still going to do it like their mom. Yeah. The only way to do it differently is to go back to your own wounds and heal them, because your mom also was reacting out of her pain. Yes. She wanted control over you because you triggered so much pain in her. So she tried to that triggering control, she made her control you. Yeah. So in that moment when your kid, quote unquote, triggers you, it's going to attack that same pain in you, and you're going to control your kid, whether you made a decision, whether you meditated in the morning, whether you wrote 10 times on a paper, I will not yell at my kid. You will yell at your kid, because it's coming from a raw, broken place inside you. You're not yelling at your kid because you're mean. You're yelling at your kid because it's touching a deep wound within you. And that's what I teach parents, how to recognize the wound and how to heal the wound. And for that, they're going to have to come to hear my talk.
I agree with you. And to spend time with you, we're only doing 40 minutes or so. To spend a whole day with you, I think it goes from 10 till 2 in each of the cities, just to have that opportunity. Is there a time to exchange ideas and can people put their hands up? Is there time for interaction with you?
Yeah, so the first part of the day is just a talk and exposing people to the profound ideas on conscious parenting. And the second part is a deep dive, and they can buy an add-on ticket, I think, and they can come and be in a more intimate environment with me. And we need 3-4 hours to do this most profound. Children are our most important relationship in many cases. So we have to really devote the energy. And the arrogance of us parents is that we know how to parent. No, we don't know how to parent. I wish I had been more humble before I became a parent, because I would have done a better job then. But I too had this arrogant delusion that I'm going to be amazing because it's my kid. Well, no, I guess what? I didn't even recognize who this kid was. And I kept trying to mold my daughter to fit my expectation of her. And it was a disaster till I woke up. And it was only when I woke up and then kept waking up that I could minimize the damage that I've already caused her,
So let's talk about what is consciousness. We've spoken about hierarchical and traditional narratives and coming from ego and coming from that place of reactivity. I'm not saying we're aiming for perfection. No one's ever going to get perfection. That's another form of control. But if we were to begin tuning into being a conscious parent, what would that perhaps look like?
So it's a process, and you have to go through a process. It's not just a mental decision, but part of that process involves recognizing how your ego is set up to protect you. And it's protecting the little child in you that is still broken. And you have to begin to observe. The first step in conscious parenting is awareness. So when I have clients, I give them homework for the first 30 days to go and observe. You are now in a museum of your own life, and you're going to just start observing. And I make them write copious notes. Okay, when my kid said this, then I felt this, then I did this. When my kid did that, then I felt this, then I did that. Just basic observation, because I'm trying to wake up our inner witness. We have become zombies in our lives, where we go through our lives in reaction mode. We're not observing ourselves or our children. And if we don't observe, we won't understand. So if we don't understand, we can't break patterns. So the first step is to observe. The second step that I help parents do is identify their patterns. Look, when your kid does this, then your inner child feels this, and your ego does this. And I've identified patterns, and I'm going to share that in my talk. We have 5 predominant ego patterns based on our survival techniques of we either fight or we flee or we fix. And I'm going to talk about this more when people come. So I help people identify their ego patterns. Once you identify the ego pattern, now you are going to be in shock at how clear it is. And then I help you break that pattern. So first we observe and become aware, then we understand the pattern, then we identify the pattern, and then we disrupt the pattern. This is the process, and there is no bypassing this process. You can't just say, I'm going to be a conscious parent. What does that really mean for you? It means something different for Remy than it does for Anna, and it does for Samantha. It's very different for each parent.
And I think you talk about it taking 2 years. I think it's a lifetime of retuning and attuning to what's coming up within me. I've been on this journey for more than 2 years, and I'm still revisiting, coming home. Hey, how you doing? What's going on in there? What just happened? Just this power of the pause and revisiting this inner child that feel so alone sometimes and so abandoned or judged or whatever it is in that moment. And if you're with a child, their reactivity is immediate. Like they're flared up immediately. Their tantrum is in a heartbeat. They're throwing that toy is immediate. And then we're asking ourselves to pause and get in touch with ourselves so we can be present mindfully to this moment. How do we do that when so much of this is come back to me, come from centered self, when the child's doing it right then and there in our faces? And it looks like they're doing it at us.
Yeah, it's incredible because at first it feels like such an impossible endeavor. How do you stay calm when your kid is losing their crap? But let me tell you, as you heal and you become more whole from within, there's just less provocation. There's just less reactivity. But you have to go through that process. And then it's not an intellectual, how do I not lose my shit? It's just, you just don't lose your shit because you have now healed the part in you that was losing its shit. It's not intellectual. It's all psychological and emotional. So as you heal, you automatically become a calmer person. It's quite amazing. So if you're a parent listening right now and you have been embarrassed by how you lost your temper yesterday or just this morning, I can help you become more calm, not through just intellectual techniques, but through a genuine understanding of who you are and why you're losing your shit. And then as you have more compassion for yourself, you automatically become a more compassionate person. So if you're a parent listening and you just don't know how to do this, well, then you need to come and learn and expose yourself to what I teach in conscious parenting.
And it's not my kid will grow out of it. One of the things you talk about in the book is however we didn't show it when they're younger, they're taking that to another level as they get older. And it will become escalating and harder to, inverted commas, control. So it's not they'll grow out of it, or it's not that big a deal, or they'll come around, or it's not my problem. We're in co-partnership with our children, step by step with them. You call it spiritual partnership, I think. Have I got that correct?
Yes.
It's a spiritual union. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's changing this whole like me to her, me to him, us versus them. It's just like, okay, my kid is growing. How am I growing along with my kid? And what do I need to learn in this moment? And it's really looking in the mirror and asking yourself, how can I evolve? What is coming up for me? And that's such a beautiful way to parent, because then you're always going to learn something from your kid. And it's not about you teaching, it's about you having a teacher. And I am hands down clear that I've learned more from my kid than my kid has learned from me. I mean, if anything, I've messed my kid up. And then I say sorry to my kid all the time. I go, oops, sorry. But thank you for teaching me about me. At least I've learned something, and that's so amazing that we can learn from our children. That's the beauty of children. And we're missing it because we're caught up in our ego that we are the teachers and we are the powerful ones, but we're really not.
Really profound message. You're an absolute pleasure to chat with. I think it's fantastic we got to connect here. So grateful. Now we've got some dates. If you're viewing this and you are in Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, or Melbourne, the dates are appearing on the screen now or in the show notes if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts. And you get to see them, this extraordinary doctor, this extraordinary woman in person in a city.
And New Zealand. I'm also going to New Zealand.
Wonderful. We'll put those in the show notes. I didn't get the details of New Zealand, but that's fantastic. What a pleasure. I'll get to see you this Sunday. Lovely to be able to finally meet you.
Yeah, come to Perth, come to any of the cities. I'm so excited to be there with you, and come and say hello to me, Rami.
I will do. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank
you so much for all you do.
Bye. Bye.
Hey, I trust you enjoyed this episode of Perspectives. I really, really appreciate that you take the time to watch this or listen to this. There are so many things you could be doing instead, and this is what you chose to do. I am so grateful. If you got value from this conversation, could you let me know? I would love it if you left a comment on the Apple Podcasts. If you could subscribe and leave a comment about what you love about it, I'd be so grateful. We're really trying to boost our rankings. We have so many people viewing our podcast, but it's not showing up where it gets measured. So that would be fantastic. Also, if you loved it, I'd love it if you shared it. And more importantly, I'm just so glad you get value out of it and you stick around. Thank you. I really appreciate you.